City of Killeen, and I welcome you all to tonight's town hall meeting and the State of the City address, which will be short. And I wanted to highlight you on a few things as we begin the second year. As most of you know, I was elected in May of 2012 along with a new city council, 5 new council members to join what was then Matt Lauer and Terry Clark. And we finished our first year. There was another election held in May, and Mike Lauer went off, and Steve Harris came on. So that's the council that we have now, and I can assure you that the council members all work hard. They show up and really have the best interest of the city at heart, all of them, as they consider the important business of the city. We are still in the fiscal year 2012-2013 budget year, and we may end up at the year with a little bit of money left over. The revenues are looking like they were going to exceed the projected revenues that were in the budget, and our expenses look like they're going to come in lower, so we may have some extra funds available for some projects. But that's something that the council will be discussing. Also, we're now in the midst of the 2013-2014 budget preparation, looking toward completing that in September. The budget, as we're looking at it now, will not have a tax increase. There will be no increase in the rates for water, sewer, garbage, or drainage. So that's a good thing, that we'll be able to maintain the tax rate, and it should not be a burden on you for the city operations. The economic trends are generally good. The employments at the airport are up over last year. The sales tax revenues are up. We just got the tax rolls in, and the property valuations are up. So all those things are positive signs for the community. We continue to be somewhat concerned about the future of Fort Hood. Very few people can say with any certainty what's going to happen with the Army in strength over the next few years. As most of you understand, the Budget Control Act of 2011 caused the Army in strength to decrease from 570,000 to 490,000. And the Army recently released how they were going to adapt the forces in order to accommodate that reduction in forces. And that will cause Fort Hood to lose one of its brigade combat teams, but as part of that reorganization, the remaining brigade combat teams are going to get some additional battalions. So the overall effect on Fort Hood of that portion of the restructuring is going to be a loss of 2,900 troops between now and 2017. There still are other cuts that have to be made in order to achieve the overall reduction down to 490,000. We don't know exactly where that's going to play. There had been some talk that there would be another base realignment closure commission in 2015, but it appears that will not happen. As the Army declines in strength, there was some thinking that some of the bases that are inefficient should be closed, and that would cause other soldiers to be restationed at fewer bases, and that could certainly help Fort Hood get more troops if the bases were realigned. It doesn't look like that's going to happen in 2015, and it surely won't happen in the election year of 2016, so probably the earliest we're looking at that taking place is 2017. Then that's unfortunate, something that should happen more quickly. So we continue to be concerned about the effects of the drop in troop strength down to 490,000. Sequestration is another troubling problem. Some people predict that could result, if it continues over the 10-year period, in a reduction of forces down to 390,000. That certainly depends upon the mix of cuts in technology for the Army as opposed to cuts in personnel. And no one knows really how the Army is going to figure that out. But that has caused us to be very concerned in the city about being conservative with our budgeting and taking into account those uncertainties and making sure that as we look at things like borrowing money that has to be repaid in the future, that we don't burden people over the next few years with things that are not totally necessary. We have a lot of projects going on right now. For those of you who've been in the downtown area over the last few months, you're certainly used to a lot of potholes in the downtown area and unpaved streets as they continue to rebuild the curbs and the sidewalks in the downtown area. put in the street lighting and some of the other improvements. The Andy K. Wells Hike and Bike Trail is nearly finished now in terms of going from the W.S. Young Community Center area into the downtown area. We've already approved planning for the trail to be extended from the downtown area to Gilmer Street, where there's a bus stop so that people can get onto Fort Hood and throughout the rest of the town. So my understanding is that we do have some more funds that have come in from the Department of Transportation. The downtown area, we hope to get that revitalized through a series of economic incentives and a lot better marketing plan for the downtown area. I think there's going to be some tremendous opportunities for people to put businesses in down there, and there are funds available already to help provide economic incentives for those things. For those of you who traveled in and out of our airport over the last few months, you've noticed that there's construction taking place out there. The holding areas have been increased, and some other improvements have been made that are quite visible. Behind the areas that you can't see, there's a big restructuring of the baggage handling areas, and lots of money is being spent there for the new baggage handling and inspection system. That's an $8.2 million project that's going in out there, and it'll make our airport better, and we need to be able to increase that as the employments continue to increase from the 3 airlines that are working out there. Some of you may have driven by Bacon Ranch and see the transportation building coming up. That's expected to be completed in January 2014. The downtown streetscaping is scheduled to be finished in February of 2014, and we hope maybe by September or October we can get some of those streets paved in the downtown area so that it'll make it less inconvenient for those of us who do business in the downtown area. The Highway 190 project will be going on for until the spring of 2016. The Texas Department of Transportation has said that throughout most of this time, 2 lanes will remain open in both directions. That's the kind of lanes we've had open for many, many years. So it shouldn't really restrict traffic flow too much. I'd like to caution everybody that the speed limits have been changed on the highway, reduced by 5 miles per hour in most places, and also on the access roads. And the Killeen Police Department is actively working to enforce those traffic laws for the safety of the people working on the highway. We certainly don't want to get anybody killed out there, so we all need to drive safe in that area. Certainly they're working around the main gate to W.S. Young for the first phase, and then the next phase will be out to 2410 into Harker Heights. The Rosewood project is also underway. Most of you know where the Rosewood nursing home is, and there's a road in the eastern part of Killeen that will be extended northward, and it will pass through the expressway and connect with 2410. The expressway, Highway 190, will actually be an overpass that will go over Rosewood. So you're going to see an overpass being built where the highway is going to go over Rosewood, and that'll be quite a project, and it will require traffic to be rerouted, and we look forward to that really opening up East Killeen, where people can come from the south all the way up to 2410, where the golf course is now. There is a development called La Cascada, a business development that will be going in there in the area to the immediate west of Skylark Field off 2410. And that's hopefully we'll have some very nice shopping, kind of like Market Heights is laid out. So we look forward to that coming on in the very near future. We are the State Highway 195 and Highway 201 intersection is now open, and that's a good thing. We've had to deal with that for more than a year, and now for those of us heading south on 195 to Austin, like I did today, it's a lot more convenient to get down that highway. The area around Walmart and H-E-B on Tremere, has been a nightmare for traffic for some time. And we approved a project to do the engineering to expand that highway to 5 lanes. So there'll be a center turn lane, and that engineering should be complete by the spring of next year. At that time, we're going to have to make a decision whether or not to issue bonds, which could be $7–8 million to construct or reconstruct Tremere and get rid of that huge safety problem. There's a CVS pharmacy going in there across from Walgreens where they tore down the Baymont Hotel and a couple other buildings. So that's just going to add to the congestion that's already there. The City Council thinks it's important to solve that congestion problem. It's a quality of life issue for so many people. As far as other road projects, Bunny Trail is nearly finished as far as the road between Stan Schleter and what used to be the old Reese's Creek Road, Clear Creek, 201, road that goes from the airport to 195. And that'll be a nice collector, north-south collector that's badly needed between 195 and Clear Creek. Elms Road hopefully will go out for bid in early 2014. Elms Road, near the intersection of Elms Road and 195, there's some problems getting the right-of-way on the west side of 195, and hopefully that problem will be solved in the very near future, which will allow us to open up an east-west route between 195 and Clear Creek. That's something that's been sadly needed to take some of the pressure off Watercrest and Stan Schleter. But that's kind of the status of the projects. The Rosewood Interchange we expect to be done by the spring of 2015, and one of the real advantages of having a lot of these construction projects going on is if we go out for bids for the Tremere project, we think we can get a really good bid and take advantage of lower interest rates now because the construction companies are already here and will not have to include in their bids the cost of marshaling all their assets and bringing them here for the construction project. Let me give you a little update on the state of code enforcement. For more than a year now, we've been talking about Killeen Up. One of the things that we want to do as far as enhancing our image is to make Killeen look better. Back when the war started in 2003 with the deployment of the 4th Infantry Division, a lot of press came to town and described us as a scruffy army town, and that offended some people, but for some of the rest of us, we took a hard look at ourselves and said, you know, we probably need to start doing something about this. So there's been a steady improvement in code enforcement since 2003, and the amount of code enforcement people is actually about 4 times as many after this budget as it was back in 2003. So we're putting more resources on the street. For a long time, code enforcement really, in the eyes of many people on the council, hasn't been as effective as we'd like it to. You could kind of look at it like a police force that never wrote any tickets for speeding. What you would find is that there would be a lot of people speeding because there's no downside to not speeding. That's kind of the way code enforcement, many of the code enforcement activities have been. If you don't write people up and fine them for their transgression, so to speak, there's no incentive for them to comply. The council has given clear priorities to code enforcement, and we hope to see more compliance in the future. We are looking at the ordinances, and as time permits, we will revise the ordinances. There are some things in the ordinances that are silly, and there are some things that need to be in the ordinances that are not there. And we're going to try and do our best job of going through those and rationally come up with a good set of standards for code enforcement to use. The current budget calls for at least 2 more code officers, and some council members have asked the city manager to look at the possibility of adding more code enforcement officers. You know, the image of our city and the way it looks is really something that we should all be concerned about. It doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort for people not to throw trash out the window of your car, but keep it in there, and when you refuel or get home, put it in the proper receptacle. There's far too much garbage being thrown in the streets. There's a lot of people who don't pay attention to those things, and we need to start doing that. It's just not, you're not being a good citizen unless you take some responsibility for your own trash and garbage. You need to be proud of the place you live in, and pick up the trash, and mow your lawns, because I promise you that there will be a day when, if you're not doing that you're going to be paying fines, and that's what should happen to you if you're not doing that. When you drive through Fort Hood, the housing areas out there, you don't see many people that need their lawns mowed. The reason for that is they simply don't tolerate it. That needs to be the kind of city that we are, where people know that there's consequences if you don't take care of your property. That also needs to be, we need to look at the situations of some of our buildings that are dilapidated and require repairs. Some of the buildings that are not safe, and certainly code enforcement will have a hand in that as well. When we look at the agenda for the future in the City of Killeen, the council last night, after deliberating since October of last year, finally made a decision with regard to a major development in the south of the city in our extraterritorial jurisdiction. And that was something called the Municipal Utility District 2. Or as we affectionately refer to it, the MUD. And it first came to us as a consideration for annexation into the city as a planned unit development. And the number of lots has kind of been something that's kind of been somewhere between 3,500 and 4,800, depending upon the versions that we've looked at. And it's really a planned community with a boulevard that's about 4 miles long north and south, running from roughly Chaparral to near the river. And there's lots of, if you will, subdivisions that go off of this boulevard. And there's trails and open land and parks and amenities and things like that in there. And the council kind of thought it'd be nice for the city to have a nicer development. But naturally there were concerns about development standards. There were concerns about density. There were concerns about the cost to the city if we brought this into the city limits, where we would have to put in the utilities. There are no sewer interceptors out there. There are no water lines out there in that part, because it's really south of the city limits. And looking at what it would cost us to put in a major sewer line and a lift station to pump the sewage to our south sewage treatment plant, and to do the water and some of the road improvements that would be necessary on Tremere and Chaparral, the city council we thought we were looking at over $20 million in costs that would largely have to be funded through the issuance of bonds. Given the other things that we felt were high priorities, given the uncertainties of the future, although I think the majority of the council wanted this development to be in the city limits, we didn't feel like it would be prudent financially to issue the bonds to fund this. And once we turned down the PUD, then we were considering, PUD is the planned unit development, then we were going to consider the MUD, or the Municipal Utility District. And early in 2013, at the start of the legislative session, legislation was introduced to form a MUD, and the city was asked for its consent, which we gave on a provisional basis for the purposes of the legislation being introduced, but subject to final consent. After a lot of consideration, and I mean dozens of hours of negotiations, meetings, plans, briefings, the council voted not to proceed with the MUD. And so the MUD can be created in one of two ways, either through the legislative process or through an administrative process through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So in essence, we effectively killed the MUD as far as it being created by the legislature when we refused to consent, because the chances of the legislature approving that without the city's consent were basically none. So that triggered the developer then to start the creation of the MUD through the administrative process, and the first part of that was to once again ask the city for consent. And we had 90 days in which to either consent to the creation of the MUD, or it would be considered denied, which would then trigger them to ask us to provide the utilities. So then we were in a situation where once again we would be forced to come up with a bunch of capital outlays in order to provide utilities, or else the ability to sell utilities to this development, which would be a money-making proposition for the city, would go by the wayside. So we really felt that we were between a rock and a hard place, and probably needed to look once again at a MUD consent agreement. And the council directed staff then to negotiate that, and over the course of a month and a half or so, that was negotiated and finally approved on a 4-3 vote. But it was a difficult decision for all the members of the council. I can assure you that everyone on the council agonized over these decisions, and I think everybody voted their conscience and did what they thought was the right thing. The recycling has been something that we've been talking about in the City of Killeen for many years, and more and more cities our size are going to recycling. There's a cost associated with recycling. There's no question that when you buy 48,096 gallon containers for our customers, it costs money that you wouldn't be charging if you didn't do recycling. You're going to have additional trucks to go pick those things up, and you're going to have additional drivers. So there's certainly an additional cost associated with recycling. There are some benefits. Currently, all the garbage that's picked up is hauled to our transfer station, and then, as the name would imply, it's then put into different kinds of trucks to be hauled to the landfill in Temple. That landfill has a life of about 15 years remaining. And there's a significant cost associated not only with the hauling of the trash to Temple, but also the cost of putting it in the landfill. So if you can divert the recyclable materials to a recycler without having to haul those and pay for them in the landfill, you're going to achieve some cost savings. There's also somewhat of a market here and there for the recycled items, and that market is somewhat volatile, and that's been explained to us that we really can't count on that revenue very much in the future. So when we look at it, looking at the savings and the additional costs, it's pretty clear that there's an additional net cost to our ratepayers where we're going to have to charge more for doing that. So that's what we're struggling with now, is how to, first of all, we have not made any final decision other than to study the issue. And once we've studied it, then we have to look at how we're going to have a rate structure that will take into account those additional costs of providing that service, and leave us with a fund balance and an operation in solid waste that is healthy. But that's certainly something that we will agonize over, probably outside of the budget process. We will probably approve a budget that does not have recycling in it, and then look over the next few months at how to do a budget amendment and reflect that. With regard to water, we're still struggling with 3 issues. When I say water, I'm really talking about water and sewer. One of the issues that we have is what I can just generally refer to as water reuse. We have 2 sewage treatment plants that are operated by Water Control and Improvement District Number 1. One of them is on 38th Street, and one of them is our south plant located north of Chaparral Road. And after the sewage is treated, the effluent from the plant on 38th Street is led into Nolan Creek. And the effluent from the south treatment plant is pumped through a force main back up over the hill, also into Nolan Creek. As water becomes more and more scarce, one of the sources of usable water for the city could well be this water that we call effluent that gets dumped into the streams. We had a permit for about 20 years to water our golf course by pumping water out of Nolan Creek. And that permit expired some time ago, a couple years ago. So since then, we've been using treated water to water the golf course. We've been using treated water to water the parks, ball fields, and many of the other areas in the city. That could well be, we could use reuse water at a much lower rate. We're in the process of negotiating a contract with Water Control and Improvement District Number 1 that would allow us to use that water hopefully by the spring of next year on the golf course, and then have a system where we could retail that water to other entities, maybe other portions of the city government like the parks and recreation, possibly to the colleges, universities in our area, or to other commercial developments. People who irrigate currently could do their irrigation at a lot less cost for water. In the future, you can expect water, as it becomes more and more scarce, to become more and more expensive. So we need to look at cheaper ways to be able to accomplish things like landscape, keeping things green and alive. The other issue is there in the future, as Texas